we're terrified of what people might think if they see the full picture of who we are, that they won't love us, that they won't accept us. But what I found is that you can only be loved to the extent that you are known.
Leading voices from the fringe, especially women and people of color. This season, we're all about sharing the stories and practices that will lead us all toward wholeness in our body, soul, and spirit. If you find yourself on the fringe of culture, our hope is that this podcast will help you feel like you belong and that your voice is needed in this world. It is time to live and lead with wholeness. Friends, welcome back to the Global Fringe. This season is so life-giving to me, and I hope that it is for you too, because we are continuing conversations with incredible voices from the fringe, predominantly women and people of color, that are guiding us towards greater wholeness in our life and in our leadership. And today I have a new friend on the show. Her name is Manda Carpenter. And Manda, this is the first time we have seen each other, talked live face-to-face with one another, and it's so fun. But we have 1,000 connections, and some that are actually going to be on the show this season, like Jeannie Stevens is going to be on the Global Fringe this season. But we have lots of friends in common, and you're doing really beautiful work in Chicago. For those of you who do not know Manda, she is a wife. She is a foster mama. She's currently got 3 kiddos in her home with her husband. But you've had 14 kiddos over the last few years. Is that right?
16 if you count the 3 that are currently with us.
And in what span of time?
So not quite 3 years. And some of those were like 4 kids for a weekend, so we just count them all. And that's the way we do it. So
yeah. And you're wearing a sweatshirt right now that I think is very true to who you are. People can't see it because this is just you and I on this video, but tell them what your shirt says.
Yeah, it says there isn't a single person you would not love if you knew their story.
So that's kind of a bit of the heart that is behind this conversation. And I want to lead us into talking about space and how we show up to one another in the world, because I think that the places where we are internally reveal themselves externally, right?
Absolutely.
And so I want to talk about these 2 phrases that I see all over your social media, all over your website. And the 2 mantra statements are impressing is exhausting and space used well isn't selfish.
Yes.
I think both of them are really powerful for women, are really important internal journeys to work through publicly. So I want to start with this phrase of impressing is exhausting. And I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit of your story about why that phrase is important to you, why it has bubbled up in your life. So take us down that road for a minute.
Yeah, sure. I feel like I just grew up in a home that was very focused on productivity. And so this impressing is exhausting and space, they really go hand in hand. Yeah. But focusing on the impressing is exhausting for a minute, growing up in that kind of home where everything, not that my parents didn't love me unless I performed well, but it was very much, that was a lot of the environment that I came from. And so, and I think too, we just live in a society that's like,
yeah,
put your best foot forward, dress to impress, don't air out your dirty laundry. Social media can propel this whole thing because it's a highlight reel. And so I just feel like throughout college and the first few years out of college, I was just a hot mess trying to figure out who I am, because the person that I was portraying myself to be, not just online, but in person too, I didn't feel at home in my own body. I didn't know who I was. And I think I was so caught up in trying to be what other people wanted me to be, and also caring so much and being so aware of how they might be perceiving me, and tweaking or trying to alter. And if you're familiar with the Enneagram, this might sound very like Enneagram 3. And I'm not an Enneagram 3, but I really get them a lot. And I think all of us have that performer in us that, if we're not careful, can really be destructive in our lives. And so for me, impressing is exhausting was this point in my life where I just came to a place where I was like, I'm exhausted all the time. I'm not happy. I don't know who I am. I feel like I have to shrink myself and be someone I'm not. And it was just confusing and exhausting. And I finally just like surrendered that to God. And for me, what that looked like was I felt like my whole life kind of came crumbling down and I had to rebuild it and figure it out. And it hasn't been this perfect, like, I wish it was as easy as it just sounded. Like
it's never that easy if your whole world crumbles.
Right. And I share more about that in my forthcoming book. That's with Zondervan, coming out in February of next year. So I won't give it all away, but there's some very specific, very, really hard things that I had to go through that I didn't know I was capable of. And unfortunately, that was like my own hitting rock bottom. And then what was so cool is like, I feel like God revealed to me that like on the other side of impressing, when we just like fully live in the light and live who he's created us to be and accept ourselves, one, that there is acceptance on the other side, that people will actually accept you for who you really are, not who you think that, you know, they want you to be. Yeah. But also there's just freedom. There is enormous freedom. And I genuinely am passionate about other people because I know I'm not the only one who struggled with this or continues to struggle with. Let's be honest. It's not just like it's gone, like it's magically gone forever. Like that it's something that we can get to a place where we're like, you know what? This is not. And just for disclaimer, this isn't just about our looks, right? Like when we think about impressing, I'll even see people tag me online with like, impressing is exhausting, like a no makeup selfie. That's great. That's actually really wonderful.
It's one level.
Like, love it. But this is so much deeper than that. This is not just about not wearing makeup. And I actually have nothing against makeup. In fact, I don't really care about what you choose to do with the outside of yourself. I care about your soul. I care about what's going on internally. And that's really my journey of impressing is exhausting. It's learning to live in the light and really to own who God made me to be.
There's a really interesting dichotomy that you just talked about of you said like you found yourself shrinking back and kind of like living small. And yet when I think of impressing, it's almost the opposite. It's like a puffer fish where it's like you're blowing yourself up to look like you're something that you're not. So it's like this reverse effect that happens. Like you are becoming less of who you are while trying to position yourself as more than who you are. And that gap that's where I think that total deconstruction, that like falling apart often happens, is there is no longer a way to bridge that gap. And you become exhausted. There is a fallout, a bottom, and like in the 12-step world, like life has become unmanageable.
Yes. Yeah. And I love that you actually pointed that out. I always forget that for a lot of people impressing, and it's both, like you just said, but for a lot of people impressing is really like, the puff in their chest, the saying maybe things that aren't true or being a little bit fabricating on their success or whatever. Yeah. For me, it was very much the opposite. I really tried to suppress all of this like intensity inside of me and all these passions that I had because I was taught in my world, in my upbringing, that it was too much and that for a Christian woman, that was like not okay. Yeah. And so for me, it mostly had this opposite effect where the way that I impressed was to totally become, and there's nothing wrong with these words that I'm about to say, but to become very meek, mild, and very almost complacent and all that to say, if that's someone's natural wiring and that's how God created them, there's a reason for that and they can live into that purpose. That was not how God created me. And doing that every day, it felt not only exhausting, but it felt like I was slowly dying inside. Like it just was awful.
Yeah. So this is where you and I think are simpatico. You're an Enneagram 8. I am an Enneagram 8. And so the work that I have done around embracing what does it mean for me to be a challenger, to be big and bold, and to show up fully in my life. There's enough that has been shared publicly about the Enneagram 8 that Christian women 8 are the most misunderstood on the Enneagram. And I have lived that as well, feeling very misunderstood, feeling very not myself in my own skin. How do I live fully and large? Like I actually I'm giving a message this weekend at a church in Northern California that I gave a few years ago at a church that we both are familiar with in South Bend area, Indiana. And one of the things that I'm saying in this message is that for years, I found myself living at 60% of my potential.
Yep.
And people would look at my life and go like, oh my gosh, you're killing it. You're slaying it. You're doing so much stuff. You're living so big. But I knew that I was holding back because it did not look like what it was supposed to look like for a Christian woman, for somebody who follows Jesus. And I think that there's huge lies that you are doing a beautiful job of uprooting first for yourself, because that's where transformation begins. But as you do that, you are offering freedom and offering acceptance for other women in particular, that you don't have to, it doesn't look like a specific thing. You don't have to fit a box. What it looks like for you to be you is for you to be you.
Yeah. Yeah. Preach. No, totally. And just to take it a little bit further, for me, the whole concept of impressing is exhausting is also about not sweeping our dirt under the rug. Like, I'm not saying you need to go air out your dirty laundry. Like, I'm not saying that, but I definitely really kept some sin in my life hidden, because I was terrified that if anyone found out, it was always this, like, I couldn't even accept a compliment or a praise from someone, because even if it had to do, like, they could tell me like, oh my gosh, you're such a great friend. Like, I might think like, yeah, I am a great friend, but it's this really weird thing that happened where I couldn't even fully embrace or accept their compliments, because I always had this little voice that was like, but if only they knew, if only they knew this sin, if only they knew this. Like, it ended up it really did steal all my joy and ruin so much of, like, the joy that I was meant to have in various seasons, because I just had sin that was really hidden, and I didn't know that there actually was a way to deal with it. Yeah. My whole thing was like, I just have to keep, like, hiding it. And so impressing and exhausting also is a lot about that. And it's hard, but, like, I've found that you can't heal in hiding. That's what I've learned. And so it's so much of that too, and that's why when I see those makeup list selfies, like, I love it. Go you, girlfriend. Like, that's great. It's not about the makeup for me. It's about my soul. It's about my sin. It's about not hiding so that I can heal and be all of who God created me to be.
Yeah. It's crazy that I'm just tracking with you. This message that I'm giving this weekend is called, It's Time to Stop Hiding. And for me too, that story begins in the beginning, when man and woman hide from God for the first time because they don't live in alignment with what God has invited them into, and they feel naked. They are naked, but they see it. They see their nakedness. There's shame. And there's this, I don't want to be seen. So they hide. They hide physically behind something, but they hide from their creator. And I think it's an incredible picture of who God is, that the first thing that God says is a question. It's not a judgment. It's not a condemnation. It's a question. And the question is, where are you? And so when I think about this idea that impressing is exhausting, like, it's exhausting to hide. And that hiding looks like you not showing up in whatever Enneagram type you are, with whatever dreams you have, with whatever goals that God has placed within you, with however it is that you're supposed to live. Those expectations can be totally exhausting. So I'm wondering, Manda, if you do work with a lot of women and you have an incredible following of women on social media. And so even that can be exhausting, right? Like, you can having to, like, put stuff out there and lead people towards this new way of life. That can be an exhausting way to live. But what have you found are the things that cause women specifically, but I think that it's not just women. There's men struggle with this thing too. What are the primary ways that we try to impress people, or we hide, that creates this exhaustion and this dissonance within us?
I love that question. I think we do it in a variety of ways. A couple that come to mind right off the bat. I think we try to pretend that we have more capacity than we have. Yeah. Sometimes we're not actually even pretending that we have more capacity. We are convinced that we have a larger capacity. Yeah. For Enneagram 8s, like you and I, that's really hard to learn. Like, guilty. I'm not invincible. I actually had to, so it's funny, the pendulum kind of swung really far one way as I came into freedom with God. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to be all of you who you made me to be. Yeah. And then I feel like I've had to swing back a little bit, because I'm like, oh, but I'm not God. I'm not invincible. I actually do have limitations. So I see it through that. I see it I think this is very specific to women. I think relationally, we don't like to admit or show anyone or let anyone in when things are tough. That's in our marriage. That's in our friendships. I think relationships are just something that most of us as women value so highly. And it's really hard for us to say, my marriage is rocky.
Yeah.
Because we don't want people to perceive us as having a rocky marriage. We also don't want people, you know, and it's so hard. And again, I'm not saying that people should air out their stuff, but like whether that's going to a counselor or just confiding in a close friend or finding wise counsel otherwise, it's so important. But I think we have a lot of pride and shame. And there's so much that I could say about those things. But I think that we hide our mess because we're either in denial or because we're terrified of what people might think if they see the full picture of who we are. Yeah. That they won't love us, that they won't accept us. But what I found is that you can only be loved to the extent that you are known. So it is so funny because by the way that I had been living, I received love, but maybe like 20%. Yeah. Now I'm fully, let's use my husband for the example of this. My husband fully knows me. He knows all my sin, all my junk. Like it is like, I'm talking total transparency in ways that I never thought I'd let anyone in that deep. And it happened after we were married. It's not like we got there before we were married. That's probably how it should happen, but it didn't. So it's like when he didn't run and go get a divorce or run in the other direction or just think I was crazy and instead stayed with me and said, I still love you. I think for the first time I felt love at 100%. And that was a picture of God's love for me. And it was earth shattering. Yeah. It changed my life. And it's why I can't stop doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of transformation, right? Is like when you have experienced that, all you want is more of that for yourself, but then also more of that for others. And I love how you are leading us into that. I want to go into and teasing out this idea of we pretend that we've got more capacity than we do. And that's a place of exhaustion. Which is connected to this other mantra that you've got of that space used well isn't selfish. So I'm wondering if you can, first of all, like let us into your story a little bit more there too, about burnout and of hitting that wall, hitting that bottom, and how it led you to that truth.
Yeah, totally. So like I said earlier, I grew up in a really ultra productive home. Like I grew up in a home where my mom, and I love her dearly, we're best friends. So she already knows this. It's like totally out there. She like very much raised us to not be lazy, and which is beautiful. But I think she took it to an extreme. So like we were never allowed to sleep in on Saturdays. We were like, it was always like, you're out of your bed, your bed is made, you're dressed, and you're doing something. Like her little phrase used to be like, I am not raising lazy people. I am not going to have a flop house. Like, let's go. Like she was just that kind of woman, and well-intentioned. I mean, I totally attribute my work ethic to the way that she raised me in large part. But it came to a point where in college, I was double majoring, running on the track team on scholarship, working part-time as a waitress, part-time as a nanny. And then I worked at Ulta, which is a beauty store. I did the night shift, the graveyard shift, stocking shelves. And I went to a small Christian school where we had a curfew. And I even had to get them to extend like my curfew because I worked the graveyard. And people were like, why are you killing yourself? Yeah. And I kid you not, I was like, I'm not killing myself. Y'all just lazy. Like I love my roommates and they're some of my best friends, but we laugh to this day because they were like, one of my girls, this is so funny, but last weekend I had two of them here at my house staying with me just for a little college reunion. And she even said, I used to be so terrified when you'd get in you'd come in from whatever you were doing into the dorm, because she's like, you would like give me this death glare because I was napping. And we had one class together, and she was like, I remember every time we left class, you'd be like, all right, let's go write the paper right now. And she's like, I would tell you like, it's not due for 3 weeks. And you'd be like, nope, we're getting it done now. So it was like this insane, I was a slave
to like a hyperactivity, man.
Oh, totally. I was just like, I don't need sleep. I can do it all. And then my health started declining. I had really swollen lymph nodes in my armpits. My eyelids swelled shut from my eyebrow bone to my top of my cheekbone. Wow. I was like a medical mystery. I went to the optometrist, the allergist, the different specialists. They couldn't figure out like, why was I every few days, my eyes would totally swell shut and I'd have really swollen lymph nodes. So they're doing blood work. I'm going to different doctors. Then I had ulcers on my tongue. And I'm still this medical mystery, and they just cannot figure it out. It was stress.
Yes.
It was stress.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, okay, so I should keep telling you the story really quickly, but so I am this girl who's just insane. I'm a machine.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, a lot of people thought it was crazy, but a lot of people praised me for it, right? Like, you are such hard work. So then it became my identity.
Yes.
And it was a pride thing. And it wasn't until like the health got worse and really I had no other choice but to pause, that I realized things had gotten out of control and that I might have a little OCD issue that I needed to go to a counselor and start psychiatry and look into.
Yeah.
So I kind of went down that journey. Then, so I kind of I feel like things got better. Okay. They got better. But after college, I was no longer on the track team. I was working as a teacher. So my hours changed. I had summers off. Life was very different. And I still kept myself booked a lot, like with friends and with activities and volunteering. And I kept my life pretty full. But the moments that I had any space, any breathing room, I'd have a panic attack.
Wow.
I would actually have a panic attack because my anxiety, when I had a moment where everything kind of caught up, I couldn't. Yeah. So then, of course, I went backwards. I had kind of digressed. And I went back to the way that I used to live. And I just kept everything filled because as long as my time was always filled, I didn't have anxiety or didn't feel like I had anxiety.
Yeah.
So it was this weird thing. And I would say, this is the story that I tell people all the time. I've never thought that I would ever hear an audible voice from God. But in the middle of a run, I was training for another marathon. I was in the middle of a run, hot and sweaty, August 2018, I think. And so not that long ago. And it was like a month before my birthday. My birthday's in September. And I just felt like I had been processing like, my goals and like, what do I want this year? And like, what is this next year going to be about? Turning 26 or 27 at the time. I can't keep the dates straight. But I felt like God's voice just said, you need space. And I stopped, I sobbed. Wow. I went home and told my husband, who laughed because again, I was the yes girl. I did it all. I'm kind of limitless, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I went on this private journey with God where I figured out kind of what this meant. Honestly, it's really bizarre looking back. But it started with I took things off my plate. I found, what can I get rid of? I started scheduling, like, I'm going to just sit for 15 minutes and be with God here on this day, kind of plug and play. And as it organically evolved, it turned into even finding out, as I spent time with God, that I needed to get rid of good things in my life even. Yeah. Good things meaning leading a small group. So I said, I'm done after this session. Other good things, I volunteered with a different organization, and that needed to go. There was just these things that I was like, okay, God, I'm creating all this space. Now, what are you going to do with it? And what's really cool is during all of that, simultaneously, I started spending more time with the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And I started reading more about Jesus, and I looked for things that I hadn't ever looked for before. So I was like, okay, if this is from God, if that was really God's voice telling me I needed space, and I had this whole emotional breakdown over it, if this is real, then I'm going to study the life of Jesus, and it's going to reveal itself to me. It's going to be more clear. What does it even mean to have space in my life? What is this? And I noticed Jesus took naps, and I was like, oh, my mom taught me that was bad. Naps are terrible. You're not supposed to nap. That's lazy. And so I actually forced myself to try and learn how to take naps. I saw that Jesus withdrew to pray, and I was like, oh, I usually pray on the go. I actually, while I'm working out, that's when I'm praying. And it was like, well, what if I try not to do it on the go? What if I actually set aside separate time? And anyways, as this evolved, I feel like I just had my mind blown as I learned more of these details about Jesus and his life that I think we easily can overlook. And they're really little details, but they made all the difference as I started to model my life after his in those small ways. And I think the other biggest thing about that changed my life was I realized that my whole life I've been trying to live up to some perceived potential. I was told to live out your full potential. And then I thought about Jesus, who's the Son of God, who had all the potential in the world, who had all the power in the world. And yet, he healed people and he did miracles and stuff like that. But this guy who's truly limitless, he didn't live out his full potential. He could have reached more people and done more. And he didn't need naps. And so I was like, maybe Jesus didn't live out his full potential. And maybe that's not actually a godly mindset to have. And I was like, okay, well, what did Jesus do? If he didn't live out his full potential, what did he do?
Yeah.
And on the other side of that statement, I found like he fulfilled his commitments one at a time as he was headed down this mission. He fulfilled his commitments one at a time on this mission. And so I was like, okay, that's how I want to rebuild my life. I want to fulfill my commitments one at a time.
Yeah. Wow. I think part of what is interesting even about that word potential is potential can feel like a really exciting word when you're in your 20s. And as a sidebar, Manda, I think that one of the gifts of your 20s and one of the things that is necessary to do in your 20s is to go on a journey like you have, where you are intentionally and proactively figuring out who you are and what it is that the image that has been placed within you of the divine God, to heal from childhood wounds, to pay attention to your story. I think that is like the goal or the point or the mission of your 20s is to live into that, because it then will change how you do your 30s. And I'm 40 now. I turned 41 this year. And in every decade, I think that there's a different area of focus for us to become fully. And so in your 20s, that word potential feels exciting and exhilarating and what could be. But a part of what potential, filling your potential looks like for me now that I'm in my 40s is it looks like recovery, not just output. And so even as you're talking about what Jesus did and modeled for us in the Gospels, part of the way that Jesus showed us how to live into our potential is in Matthew 11. It's one of my favorite passages of scripture. It talks about how Jesus teaches us to come to him and to learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And when we do, we can learn to live freely and lightly. And that is a part of living into potential. It's not just how many goals am I going to achieve? How many to-do lists am I going to cross off? How many followers can I gain online? Like, that's not the point. The point is to learn to live freely and lightly. And that's the promise that we can that we're given if we choose that way of life. And space is critical if we are going to learn to live freely and lightly. But it comes at a cost, I think. And I would love to hear, both in your own experience and as you lead and guide others, what are the costs that you pay in order to create space?
Yeah. A couple of the costs are, if you don't like conflict, you're not gonna like the beginning of your journey when it comes to space, because you're gonna have to say no a lot.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to create boundaries, not only with yourself and your little world in your own home, but outside of that. And so you're probably going to run into conflict. It's going to cost you some peace in that sense, but it's going to give you a lot more peace in a different sense. Mm-hmm. It's going to cost you some opportunities.
Yeah.
That's been true for me. The old Manda would have said yes to back-to-back speaking engagements, because why not? Like, I didn't even think of why wouldn't I? And now the new Manda is like, okay, one, logistically, that's going to be like crazy. Mm-hmm. And can I actually show up my best for both of these things? No. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to have to pick. So it costs you an opportunity sometimes. Yeah. Space will cost you your freedom at times. And when I say that, what I mean is, and this is where the space used well isn't selfish part comes in, but when you have space in your life, because there are actually two different groups of people that when I think about space, there are people who are so busy they don't have it. And then there are people who have a lot of space, but they don't use it well.
Sure.
And the mission really is to use it well. So one, I teach people and help them on how to create it, which is a lot of what we were talking about so far. But the using it well, and when I say it costs you some freedoms, what I mean by that is I have to make a choice when I have space in my life, how I'm going to use it. Mm. Am I going to binge watch Netflix for 3 hours straight or scroll around on Instagram and be mindless? That's not using my space well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's not a freedom, but I guess that liberty to just like do whatever I want, it comes into question, because instead I know I need to check in.
Yeah.
I know I need to journal. I know I need to be with God. I know I need to look inward. I might need to have a time of confession. That's a regular practice in my life. There are so many ways we can use our space well. Like the other day, I really just wanted to watch another episode of a show that I like. But I had told myself like, no, I think you need to go for a walk and just be with God, like no phone, no music, no headphones, and just enjoy creation. And so it's like, oh, discipline, like choosing to, and I don't always get it right, obviously, but that's sometimes, yeah, I don't know if freedom's the right word, but it costs you the luxury of just doing what you want when you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. I want to tag back into what you're talking about in college when your body started revealing the stress. One of the things that I talk about a lot with folks is your body never lies. Your body is always showing you what is true on the inside out. And as a fellow Enneagram 8, listening to my body has not been something that I've done up until about 5 or 6 years ago. So you are ahead of me, girl, in this game. I am so glad cheering you on because I have paid a lot of prices too, physically, by not listening to what my body is telling me to do. And my spiritual director, when I was in my mid-20s, said to me, April, you have a really strong Popeye arm. And I was like, what the heck do you mean? And she said, you have this really, really like overly developed bicep that is all about achievements, goals, getting stuff done, doing hard things, pushing to your limits, going beyond what you think you're capable of. Like you are so strong in that like work and production arm. And she said, but your other arm is incredibly emaciated. You have no idea what it looks like to learn these unforced rhythms of grace, to recover from all the output that you're doing. And as a result, I also had a couple of panic attacks that scared the hell out of me. And she said, unless you figure out how to give yourself space, create margin, learn to rest, you are going to blow your life out. And I didn't listen at first because I thought I could do it. You know, I thought I was invincible. And another panic attack caused me to go, oh, if I don't figure this out, I'm going to blow my life out. And so our bodies, I think, are always revealing what else is going on. I'm wondering how you have learned and how you teach others to pay attention to what is going on in their bodies. How can we identify what our bodies are telling us so that we can learn to live with this kind of space and rest?
Yeah. So I won't spend a ton of time on this story, but since we both know her, Jeannie Stevens was the one that also looked me in the eye and was the one that told me your body doesn't lie, because she had looked me in the eye. I was still working at Soul City Church full time at this point. And she said, how are you? And I was like, I'm good. And I just wanted to plow through our to-do list. And, you know, I know she's got a busy, you know, lot going on. I had a lot going on, you know, here I'm trying to be her best employee and get it done. And so I was like, I'm good. And she looked at me again. She's like, no, really, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm fine. And she's like, Amanda, your eye keeps twitching. You're not okay. And I was like, and then I just like sobbed and I was like, my eye's twitching. I can't sleep at night. And it was like this whole thing. So anyways, you're absolutely correct. And I say that all the time at my space workshops, like your mind will lie. Your mind will tell you, push, you can keep going. Like your mind is going to fool you. Your emotions are going to confuse you, but your body can't lie. And so, yeah, you have to pay attention to that. And some of the ways I've learned to do so, one, I regularly check in on my body. So I have a reminder on my phone to just pause, and I'll usually put my hand over my heart and I'll just breathe. And I'll just focus in right there and kind of just check in. How am I feeling? Sometimes, honestly, it's a stupid thought. Like, oh, I'm really sore from that workout yesterday. I teach yoga 3 days a week. So sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm kind of sore. But that's actually another way I check in with my body. I teach yoga 3 days a week. I don't do it for the money. I don't do it because I'm like an obsessed yogi. I do it because it's been such a cool, like, one, I love teaching. I love being in control. That's part of the 8 in me. Yeah. So if I was going to do it, I was like, I better just be the instructor. But 2, I really love what yoga does for me, especially in those first few minutes. And then at the end of those checking in with your body and just paying attention to the signs. So for me, I look for not just like when my body is screaming at me, that's when I'm on the verge of a panic attack, or my eyelids swell shut, or my armpit, the lymph nodes in my armpit will swell, right? There's like those big ones, but I want to catch things before then. Yeah. So I really pay attention to small things, both mentally and little things as well. If I am pausing to hold still and my fingers can't stop shaking, that's a sign for me. And it's not just a blood sugar thing either. So just for anyone listening, like that is a whole separate thing. But for me, like I noticed like if I was truly like stressed out and like anxious, my body would actually shake and I couldn't control it. I think too, it's been really interesting for me to figure out that when I'm in conversations with people, I will totally lose my thought frequently when I'm stressed out. It'll just be like, poof, it's gone. And for me, that's just a sign of my anxiety and that there's way too much going on. Yeah. And so I'll actually, a practice in my life of creating space, and this is all in my devotional too, but a practice that I do is I show up for things. I try to, again, this is not perfect. It's not like I've changed my life.
We're all in process. Absolutely.
Right. But I will show up to, if I have a coffee date, a meeting, or just a fun thing with a friend, I try to show up between 5 to 10 minutes early and I'll just breathe. And I'll look around me because there's usually my soul is like 60 feet behind my body. So I have to like get places and like center myself. If I'm going to give them my best, if I'm going to enjoy and be fully present, that is just like absolutely necessary for me. I almost always get to my kids' school a few minutes early. I try to, because if I can just take a few breaths, they get the best of me. Yeah. If I am like running late and I grab them, it's just a nightmare. It's awful. And they don't deserve that. So that's part of why space isn't selfish when you use it well, because it's not just for you, it's for everyone around you.
Yes. I love that. One of the things that we tell our coaches when we go through training is your body travels by plane, but your soul travels by camel.
Love
and
it.
As an 8, we have the highest energy on the Enneagram out of any of the types. So this is why comparison and impressing and like living into other people's expectations is exhausting, because what is full and right and good for me is really different for my husband, who's an Enneagram 5, who has the lowest energy on the Enneagram, right? Like we live at very different paces. We have very different needs. Stress shows up in our bodies very different ways. But this thought of like, we can go so fast through the world and go from appointment to another conversation to a meeting to a to-do list to an errand, and things are happening all along the way that we keep moving, but our soul hasn't caught up to that look that guy gave me that made me feel weird, or that interaction with somebody that I had that made me question what I had to, what my own thought, what I had to say about that, or whatever the case may be. It is, yes, that creating space allows your soul to catch up with your body, and for you to live with wholeness, for you to live more integrated. And I mean, that is such a part of my own mission and commitment in both who I want to be in the world and what I want to bring as a leader, is for us to have our bodies, minds, souls integrated and connected. And space is just a requirement if we're going to do that. It doesn't happen by accident.
Yep, totally.
What have been 1 or 2 benefits of you creating space? Certainly there are costs. You have, lost opportunities. You have not done as much in your day as you did before. You are having to look at hard things in ways that you haven't before. But what have been 1 or 2 benefits that have made you go, this is worth the cost?
Yeah, so many. So 1 or 2 first things that come to my mind is the benefits. Joy. I'm happier. I don't, for me, it used to be really easy to have a 60-second kind interaction with a cashier at a grocery store, but man, would I snap at the people in my house, like my husband and my kids.
Yeah.
And that's happening less. Again, imperfectly. It's a journey, but joy, more joy. The other thing would be just this confidence that is so cool, because you think you're going to gain confidence by doing more and achieving more, but it's a lie. It's all a facade. It's like we chase this ghost that it's not even real.
Yeah.
And for me, I've gained so much confidence with space in my life, because one, the way that I use my space is a lot of time with God and like figuring out my identity and coming back to that place over and over again. And so then I kind of go out into the world and I feel more rooted and secure, and I'm more confident in who I am. So confidence, joy and confidence, that would be the top 2 benefits in my mind.
Yeah, because you are true to who you have been created to be. You're confident because you're becoming more comfortable in your own skin. You're becoming more of who you are. And then you're doing things that are in alignment to it. So of course you'd be confident because you're like, this is what I'm supposed to be about. Like,
Yeah.
and this is the gift that I can be offered the world.
Yeah. You walk away from interactions feeling so much better.
I love that. I love that. So let's give ourselves some space, friends. I love, you do half-day workshops around this idea of space to help women particularly, right? Is it just for women or is men too?
I have not done it for men and women, but I think it's definitely for both. I definitely targeted women in the beginning because that's sort of my audience, but it's totally applicable for both.
It is. It is. Okay. So these workshops are beautiful. I love how you talk about in space, you're creating sustainable rhythms of work, play, and rest. It is, I think balance is a joke. I think perfection is impossible. Especially when, your job, like you're self-employed like I am, you have kids like I do, like for basically any of us who are breathing, to have the same schedules day in and day out isn't a realistic thing. But sustainable rhythms are absolutely able to be crafted. And it's this awesome trifecta of you work and you play and you rest. So for those that are interested in that, we'll link that to our show notes so you can find out where Manda's going to be hosting these. You've got several on the books, right? Already for 2020?
We don't have any released publicly for the space workshops in 2020, but we'll be adding a few, and there's some other speaking engagements that are booked. So yes. Yeah,
we'll link your website and all of that to show notes. But can you tell people where they can find you online?
Yeah, just at Manda Carpenter on Instagram. I think it's Manda Carpenter blog on Facebook. Basically, if you Google Manda Carpenter, I think you'll figure it out.
Yep. And we'll link it to our show notes so you guys can click on links and find her there. I love following you. I think you do a really good job of marrying together all of what you're talking about. I think you're living what it is that you're preaching, and you're inviting us into that as well. And we need more of that in this world. So thank you for listening to your own story, paying attention to what God is writing, and I'm partnering better with God in that. I'm excited to see how this continues to flesh itself out. And 2020, we've got some vision for this year. We're going to do some good things, but let's become that along the way. So I always ask my guests 3 questions at the end of every episode because they tie into what we're about within Azer & Co. of helping to activate women to live and lead with wholeness and partnership with men. And so I'd love your take on these 3 questions. Really quick, 60 seconds or less, just like give it to me straight. Okay, you ready?
Got it.
All right. First question is, how can women be activated toward wholeness in life and leadership?
Sabbath. Implement a Sabbath weekly.
24 hours, right?
I do 24 hours, but I tell people all the time, start small if you have to. Make it, just get that rhythm, and you can always increase and tweak along the way. Just start. So for some women, it's a 15 minutes over their lunch on Wednesdays, and that's their Sabbath to start, right? And then they have to build. So I don't think we need to get caught up in the definition of a true Sabbath and worry about that. I think we got to start just building a rhythm.
Yeah. Start where you are. Beautiful. Second question is, what's the number one practice that leads you towards wholeness?
Confession.
Yeah, you said it earlier. Tell me why.
It's the worst, but my gosh, has it changed my life. Confession with, I utilize my mentor, my counselor, and my husband, all 3 of them. I didn't grow up in a Catholic church, but my gosh, I actually think that's one of the things that's so beautiful. The art of confessing. It's needed. It's where if we can't confess and name our sin out loud, it will keep a hold on us and it will bury us in shame because it lives in the dark. It lives in secret. And when we bring that to the light, it changes everything.
That's great. Last question. How can men use their privilege to partner better with women?
Yeah, I love this question because I know a lot of men that do this really well.
Yeah.
Don't talk down to us. Cheer us on. And if there's not a woman at your table for a conversation that you're having or an event that you're creating, invite us in. Look for and acknowledge your privilege as a man and do something about it.
Super practical. So it's really easy. And I love that you're surrounded by men who do this. I think that's part of how you are flying and soaring and doing so well right now is because there are both men and women who are coming alongside of you to helping you live your life in all of its fullness. So I have loved this conversation. You are a gift to the world, and thank you. Thanks for modeling for us that life can be different than impressing other people, that space is a gift. This is all like so countercultural in so many ways, and yet we all get it. Like it feels like the right thing for us. So yeah. You're a gift. Thank you. Thanks for listening today, friends. You can listen to previous episodes on our website, azerandco.com/podcast. If you're finding value, please become a patron with the link in the show notes. It costs real dollars and loads of time to produce this podcast, and your dollars make it possible for us to keep doing this work. If you're not already, take a second to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. It also means a ton when you tap your screen to rate, review, and share this podcast with others. All of that allows us to continue sharing voices from the fringe for the betterment of our world. Peace.
Hey friends, do you love podcasts like the one you just listened to? Have you ever dreamed about having your own? Well, my name is Michael and I work for TruthWork Media. We believe that everyone has a story and every story deserves a podcast. Let us help you get started. Look us up at www.truthworkmedia.com, fill out our questionnaire, and I'll schedule a time to talk. It's really that easy. TruthWork Media. Everyone has a story. Yours needs a podcast.